I'm here with Dr. Patrick Deneen. Most people know who you are, author of Why Liberalism Failed, Regime Change, and now The American Odyssey, which we're going to release this on the day that it comes out. So out today. First off, let's just start with The American Odyssey. Just generally, why did you write this book?
Yeah, so if people know my name, like you just mentioned, it's probably because of the book that I published 8 years ago, Why Liberalism Failed. And it's often referred to by people as my first book. And unbeknownst to many, my actual first book was on the Odyssey and the afterlife of the Odyssey, ways that the Odyssey has been interpreted in the history of political thought, which was based on my dissertation. So going back now decades, I was a avid student, reader, researcher of the Odyssey, and wrote quite extensively on it in my younger part of my academic career. And being made aware that the film was coming out by a friend of mine who now runs the publishing firm that brought out my book, a guy named Byron Smith, wonderful man, who mentioned to me, did you know that this movie's coming out? This was, of course, a number of months ago, a film about the Odyssey. I wasn't aware when I read more about it. We talked about it, and I thought I might be able to write a short book about the Odyssey in advance of the film. And subsequent to that conversation, as I began thinking about what I might want to write about, it occurred to me as well that this film was coming out the same month as the semi-quincentennial, so the 250th anniversary of the Declaration, and that's when the kind of lightning bolt struck, which is maybe I could write a book that in some ways tries to, in some senses, combine these two sort of coincidental dates of July 4th, 2026 and July 17th, 2026, the kind of the American Declaration and the Odyssey. And I actually think, and I hope I make the case in this book, that there is actually a kind of deep, profound connection between these two seemingly disconnected events.
Yeah, no, I think you do. One, I'll just say when you sent the book, I couldn't put it down. So it's just very readable to people. It's not very high academic, like philosophical stuff. It's very readable for everybody. So it's very good that way. But so two questions. One, what interested you just to begin with? I mean, you wrote a dissertation on the Odyssey. Why the Odyssey story? Because I think for younger people in my generation, a lot of us weren't told to read this in school. I never was told. This was never an assignment. We weren't given this, instructed to read the Odyssey. It was sort of like, those old books don't matter anymore. Here's Ibram X. Kendi.
Right. Anyone who thinks our civilization is one of progress, that's right. A sign that clearly this is not the case.
Right, exactly. So one, I felt robbed while reading your book, and even while watching the movie last night, I went to see the Odyssey. So yeah, one, why the Odyssey? Two, maybe we'll talk a little bit about, I know you saw the movie, what your thoughts are on the movie. But why the Odyssey?
So I actually was not deprived, at least in that respect, as a young person. I think if I'm correct, I think it was in middle school. It could have been freshman year of high school, but I think it was middle school that I read the Odyssey, and it was with a wonderful teacher. I loved that book. I was engrossed by it. I have to say many of my classmates thought it was boring and they couldn't stand it. So some things don't change, but I loved it. I was engrossed by it. I just thought it was a story of the human spirit and the human soul. It really spoke to me. In some ways you could say that it was kind of foundational in my own sort of formation of my mind and my interests, or it was a reflection of things that were already there. So it stuck with me. It was a book that I would reread occasionally every few years. In graduate school, when I first began graduate school, I actually went to the University of Chicago for 1 year in the Committee on Social Thought. Didn't last too long. It was committee was at that time kind of under transition from a kind of old guard to a not yet perceivable new guard. And so for me, it was a bit of a gamble to stay in a program that the faculty, I didn't know who would be staying long term. But I did have the blessing of taking a very typical course at the University of Chicago. I think it was a 2-quarter course on the Odyssey, just that one book for basically 6 months, with the great classicist David Green, who maybe your listeners know he was famous for his translations of the Greek tragedies, especially with Richmond Lattimore. So the Green Lattimore, these were like cheap, readily available paperback editions back when people read these things. And you could find them in any kind of used bookstore. Still can, I'm sure. Anyway, David Green, we would meet once a week. It was about 10 people. And we would just read slowly, line by line, book by book, and just explore every little nuance of the text. And this was so profound and so formative for me, my young adulthood. Now to have this kind of reintroduction and kind of a deep immersion in this text, kind of working between the Greek and the English translation, and the permutations of all the various stories, its background. It was just a fantastic, a kind of dream course that stuck with me. When I when I left Chicago and then re-entered graduate school at Rutgers University, now as a student of political philosophy, we had to do this kind of 1-year sequence in which we read the great books. That was the kind of preparation for political theory. And so maybe not surprisingly, as we were going through those great works, going from Plato, Aristotle, Aquinas, Augustine, so forth, I was just stunned by how often the figure of Odysseus was appearing and reappearing in all of these great works of the tradition. It shouldn't be surprising, but I began to think maybe there's something going on here. Maybe there's here's a kind of through line by which we can understand something fundamental and foundational in the Western tradition. And that's what I ended up writing my dissertation on, was the way in which the Odyssey could be read as a work of political philosophy, and then how it influenced various thinkers in the history of political thought.
In Dante's Inferno, correct?
He is, yes. Of course, I talk a bit about that as well, both in this most recent book as well as the dissertation. But the dissertation focused especially on the Odyssey and then his appearances in works by Plato, Rousseau, Vico, and Horkheimer and Adorno. So it really focused on a set of sort of ancient to modern political theorists.
Well, what did you think about the movie? Because I had heard, again, I feel like I come into this pretty ignorant about like what the Odyssey, my understanding of the Odyssey basically comes from your book.
That's too bad.
You
have to read the original.
No, yeah, and I'm reading it right now and I'm going through it. But give me your thoughts. What do you think about the movie?
So this is really off the cuff. I saw it yesterday as well, and I'm still kind of digesting it. I plan to go back and see it again. So first thoughts, and I'll say a few words in praise of the movie. First of all, it's an absolute engrossing spectacle. It is really a great, just in terms of cinematography, what you can just tell what it took to make this film is just blows you away.
Matt Damon did good too. Just you don't expect him to.
They don't make films like this anymore.
Right.
So it's like 10 Commandments level, incredible cast, vast numbers of people. Where they filmed it. Nolan's to be especially praised because he films on locations. He doesn't do the CGI shortcuts if he can avoid it. Yeah. Obviously, there's some post-production stuff.
Oppenheimer, they blew something up for that.
No, so he really wants to capture something of reality, which of course in the Odyssey is difficult because there are so many fanciful aspects to it. So I appreciate that. And I also, as someone who has read the Odyssey many times, when you read the Odyssey, certainly in a modern world, you kind of read it and you think, man, I would love to see this on the screen. Yeah. I would love to see this, I'd love to see Scylla and Charybdis. I'd love to see Cyclops. I'd love to see these figures brought to life. And I can't think of any filmmaker today who could have done anything approaching what Nolan did. And let's face it, because of what he did, we're all talking about the Odyssey now. So those are words of praise. I also just want to say, without spoiler, there were certain things that I loved that are not in the text. I loved that he dwells on the dog Argos. Yeah. Argos is a very, very brief couple of sentences. Or a couple of lines, poetic lines in the text. But Argos is a kind of appears often in the film. And my dog sitting in the other room, as you know, I think anyone who has had a pet or loves a pet, that those scenes with Argos are profoundly moving. And I think it allows us to see the way in which sometimes when you read something like the Odyssey, it can seem so distant. Its ethos is so different than our own. It's a pre-Christian world. It can be a brutal world. It's one without, the kind of sense of mercy and love. And I mean, obviously love between Odysseus and Penelope. Yeah. But those scenes in Argos, I do think call out the way in which any human being in any time and place can connect with the love that one has and the affection and the loyalty that one has for something like such simple as one's dog.
I think that's interesting because I think the reason that I heard growing up as to why we don't read these books anymore, why we shouldn't read these books anymore, is because it's sort of the progressive assumption that human nature has changed. So, we've become better, and so there's nothing to connect with anymore. Yeah. And you read it and you're like, that's not true at all.
No, that's certainly not true at all. And, I try to make that case in this book. So those are some notes of praise. Obviously, I have some real, I shouldn't say obviously, but I do have some real critiques and misgivings about the film. I guess I'll just start with some of the biggest ones. If you were, and I assume most people who are going to see this film will not have read the Odyssey. It's probably the case, unfortunately.
Right. Yeah. I was wondering, in the movie theater, I was like, how many of these people know what all this stuff means? Because even your book explains the characters and what they represent.
Yes. Yeah. So they might know some elements of the story. Probably people recognize, like there's a Cyclops and there's a Scylla and Charybdis. There are certain episodes and like he wants to get home and maybe the suitors and he kills the suitors. So I think maybe some of the sketchy outlines of the text people are aware of, but most will not have had any intimate knowledge of the Odyssey. So if I were to put myself, obviously I've read this book a lot. Yeah. If I were to try to put myself in the place of someone who doesn't know the Odyssey, here would be my big takeaways from Nolan's Odyssey. First of all, it's a kind of anti-war book, or at least an anti-war film. Like one of the overarching messages of the film seems to be that the war in Troy is basically the source of civilizational decay and dissolution, right? So a theme in the film is that coming out of the destruction of Troy, now the entire civilization is kind of in a kind of decay. And there's this constant refrain and a sense of foreboding of these invaders that are coming from somewhere far away from the sea. This is a kind of constant. Yeah. And in fact, the film kind of ends on this. And the film ends, if I remember correctly, it ends with this kind of hope that, well, maybe someday we'll restore civilization.
Do you feel like that was, I felt this way and I could be wrong, but there was a connection to the Oppenheimer?
Yeah, I think that aspect of the film is basically an echo of Oppenheimer. Yeah, okay. In a sense, Odysseus becomes Oppenheimer, kind of regretting his participation in this terrible...
The breaking of the bonds of men.
Exactly.
That's really interesting.
Exactly. Yeah. So he casts now Odysseus as this figure who regrets his role in the Trojan War, who wishes in some ways that he hadn't participated. And much of the film then is about his kind of sense of regret.
And moving from the old world to the new world, which is the Oppenheimer thing too, World War II nuclear.
Yes. Yeah. And maybe that's also part of Dunkirk as well. It's very much a theme in his work. But of course, this is absolutely not the story of the Odyssey at all.
Okay.
There's Odysseus does not regret his role in the Trojan War. It's celebrated. He's indeed it's a source of much of his stature and his honor, and he revels in his role in defeating Troy. There's no regret for, destroying the city. He has, he does have a sadness, and obviously he wishes that his men had returned with him. But also the overarching portrayal of every tragedy that happens following their departure from Troy is placed kind of the burden is placed on Odysseus as having made bad decisions, as being a bad leader. Now, he does make some bad decisions in the book, but his men make a lot of mistakes as well. Right. And this is, I think, also a kind of over kind of portrayal of Odysseus's shortcomings. So again, if I were just to have seen this movie, I would conclude, okay, so this is an anti-war text, which it is not. In fact, I would say the following, that the Trojan War is the consequence of disorder in the home. Mm-hmm. It's the consequence of an adultery, of Helen's either being abducted mm-hmm. or willingly leaving Menelaus to go with Paris. And the ambivalence of Helen is kind of completely dissipated in the film, right? In fact, the film portrays that the source of the Trojan War is really kind of the desire of Agamemnon to secure trade routes. So it's very modern in this sense. It's very modern that, okay, it is all about economic, sort of an economic basis.
Yeah, geopolitical.
It's geopolitical. It's a geopolitical war. It's a war in the Middle East, right? It's all about oil.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and so the actual source of the war, which is the abduction or willing departure of Helen, again, ambivalent, to leave Greece for Troy, to leave Menelaus for Paris, that disappears. And what then disappears is that the disorder in the home, the disorder in the bedroom, the disorder in the family has cosmic implications. The disorder of the cosmos is deeply connected to the disorder within the home, and order can only be restored when order in the home, in the oikos, is restored, which is what happens in Ithaca.
The principle of subsidiarity, essentially.
I would say that in some ways the principle of that familial, the basis of familial stability, order, the fidelity and bond of husband and wife is always going to be echoed in the political and cosmic order. And if you want to put a contemporary spin on that, well, if we have a disordered familial world, we are going to have a disordered political world, and vice versa. So that aspect of Odysseus, of the Odyssey, completely disappears in this film. And in fact, what the film tells us is that the Trojan War is the source of disorder, and the disorder now affects the entire world, when in fact, it's the restoration of the marriage bed of Penelope and Odysseus that now represents the reinstatement of civilization and the reestablishment of order. And that's gone in this movie. That doesn't exist in this movie. So number one, the biggest message of this movie, it seems to me, betrays the biggest message of the actual Odyssey.
That's interesting. That's how to think about, because I watched, Jonathan Pajot? Yeah. He did a review of it. I don't know if you saw it, but he talked about how the movie itself seemed to be a Trojan horse. And I think there's some sense to that. You talk about in your book that Odysseus is sort of a character that aligns with a lot of the American spirit of this person who's, restless for adventure, but also wants to go home. They want to be at home, but they also want to go. Did you find that concept or idea was portrayed well in Odysseus in the movie, that he was this guy who wanted to go home, but then right after he got home, he goes west. Right. Like, is that there or not?
So this would be the second major critique of the film, which is that it's not just that he wants to go home. He's a character that I think reflects, you could say, something of the human dilemma, or our kind of what in the book I call our divided soul, which is not only, of course, the American divided soul, but the human divided soul, which is simultaneously our yearning and longing for something more than what we find among the familiar places of home. Our hearts are restless, to quote Augustine. We are creatures that are always longing for more than what we have or more than what is given. And this is a source that is, of course, both a source of great adventure, innovation, discovery, this human capacity for greatness, the ambition. And this is very much a part, I think, of what we encounter with Odysseus in the text of the Odyssey. And this I saw in some ways almost entirely lacking in the film. I love many of the set pieces. The Cyclops is just incredible. Circe transforming men into pigs is just an incredible cinematography.
Yeah, that was hard to watch a little bit.
Yeah, but more or less the entire journey home, I think pretty much consistently, it's all kind of horrors. And every time Odysseus and his men stop somewhere, it's horrific.
It's a disaster.
It's terrible. It's a disaster. And so the overwhelming impression, again, if you've only seen this movie, you haven't read the book, the overwhelming impression is it's a horrible place out there. You don't want to be out there. Get home as fast as you can. Kill the suitors, right? But this disorder of this world that seems to be generated by the Trojan War is amplified in every stop of his way home, when in fact in the text there's a lot of beauty. Calypso's island, for example, in the text is beautiful. It's described in these terms it's just a lush, gorgeous, green, florid, effervescent. It's just a place where you can see and you can imagine, okay, for 7 years, Odysseus is here. He's not eating lotus. He's there at least part of the time because it's an amazing place. The goddess is beautiful. It's a place of attractions. And so, and of course, what also is missing in the film is that on the island of Calypso, he's offered immortality, which, that would be the human dream, right? To be offered immortality. That's entirely absent in the film.
Why do you think he took that out? That seems to be like a central...
It does seem to be central, but I think it's part of his desire simply to show, that Odysseus there's very little attraction to anything in his homecoming. There's very little temptation for him on the way home. And that's a betrayal of the text. There's constant temptation to do something other than return home, to become a god, to become a beast, to be with a goddess, to eat lotus and forget all of his cares. There's no temptation. And the text really, I think, what the text does is set forth a kind of the dilemma of the human spirit, which is that we are creatures that long for things that are either less or more than human. And the difficult thing for human beings, because our nature is one in which this is part of our nature, is to long for something that is either less or more than our nature. And how do we negotiate that? Not just how does Odysseus navigate that on the way home, but how do we all navigate that? How do we all navigate those temptations to be the bestial figure who in the modern day world smokes pot and plays video games, which is like the Lotus Eaters, or desires immortality, which is, transhumanism and, extending life beyond, what our four score and 10 or so by eliminating all of that, we get a flattened world of the Odyssey. Great portrayals of these monsters and these scenes, but it dissipates all of this. And so really the great story in some ways of the Odyssey is, does Odysseus, not only does he get home, does he want to get home? Does he maintain his allegiance to home? And I think the extraordinary thing is, in spite of these extraordinary, appealing, attractive temptations on the way home, he can be with a goddess forever. He can be immortal. He can take lotus and forget all of his cares. He can, a scene that's entirely cut from the film, he can live on the island of the Phaeacians, which is a kind of idyllic utopian island, marry the princess who's young and beautiful, and be in a very peaceful, well-governed, orderly home without having to go home, deal with the suitors, and get back together with his now aging wife. And the fact that he declines all of these temptations, which are real, and does return home, that's, to me, the kind of foundational lesson and teaching of the Odyssey it just doesn't appear in this film. So there's some wonderful things about the film, but if you think you're going to see a sort of cinematic version of the epic, you will be, unfortunately, sorely mistaken.
Well, with all of what you're saying, I think it leaves out too the Christ aspect of Odysseus. Christ comes into our world, temptations everywhere. and he still makes it home, afterwards, which I think now that you're talking, I'm thinking through like, yeah, Odysseus really isn't a Christ-like figure. If I'm thinking about it in that way, I don't know if I should be, but it isn't that Christ-like figure in the way that maybe the book portrays him as this person who's getting home. Is that accurate? Do you think he's a Christ-like figure?
Yeah,
or no?
I don't want to push that
Not too far? Okay.
Because he's obviously it's a proto-Christian, pre-Christian
Yes,
world.
yeah.
Well, it's pre-Christian, but I will agree in the following way that it's proto-Christian, and maybe we could say that it's providentially preparing the ground for the incarnation, sort of thousands of years before the fact or hundreds of years before the fact, in the following way, which is that what Odysseus, in some ways, he represents a kind of sacrifice. Yeah. And the sacrifice that he makes is that his love for others, in this case for Penelope, for his son, for home, is in some ways what makes possible for him to deny a kind of false immortality, to be willing to sacrifice himself and to die for the sake of others, which is to say that he turns down immortality from the goddess Calypso in order to return home. And the fact that the movie cuts this, or never portrays this incredible, this I think the most heroic act that Odysseus makes, right? There's a lot of daring do, there's a lot of fighting, there's a lot of sword play and bows and arrows. And so you see that side of Odysseus. But the most heroic aspect of Odysseus, in my view, is his willingness to accept his mortality, return to Ithaca, and to restore a kind of order in his home and thereby in the universe.
So I think people might be wondering what this has to do with America, or how you can connect this to America, especially younger people, because I grew up in a globalized digital world. There's articles written all the time about how young people are basically not going home. They are estranged from their parents. There's the psychological movement and just the idea of going home. A lot of young people, they leave after they graduate high school. They don't care about their family. They don't never come back home. And that's even happened in my own family in certain ways. So there is some, I think there are people are wondering, why is this connected to the United States? You go through in your book some American stories, and do you want to start with The Wizard of Oz maybe? Sure. And discuss?
Yeah, it's the most obvious one, right? Yeah.
So talk about that, Wizard of Oz. Yeah.
So in the book, of course, you've read it, so that's why I say, of course. The way I approached this was not to try to give you a kind of comprehensive interpretation of the Odyssey and then to follow it with a number of American analogs. Rather, I chose a number of themes in each chapter, in which I explore some of the episodes in the Odyssey to exemplify those themes, or in which I find those themes exemplified in the Odyssey. And then I pair it with a kind of iconic piece of Americana, either a film or a book, or in a number of cases, books that became films. In fact, I think all the films were originally based on some book. The one book that's only a book is Huckleberry Finn, is the most very Odyssean text as well. But the first of these themes is God, what we've been talking about, is gods, beasts, and men. And it's very much on this theme we were just discussing, which is that by my reading, the Odyssey is one of the sort of paradigmatic, iconic texts that you could say seeks to teach human beings what it is to be human. That we are this mysterious creature that, unlike my dog sitting in the other room, my dog has no difficulty being a dog. Right. And creatures have no difficulty being what they are. They simply are what they are by instinct, by nature. It's our nature, in some ways, to be open to being something other than what we are by nature. Yeah. If that sounds like that's paradoxical, and it's meant to be paradoxical, right. To long to be less than human and more than human. And so gods, beasts, and men. And I begin by pointing out that the Odyssey, of course, is populated by all of these beasts, all of these gods. Less gods are less evident in the Nolan film. And Odysseus's passage home is a kind of, you could say, a negotiation between the ultimate Scylla and Charybdis of beastliness and godliness. How does one how does one negotiate that passage without losing one's humanity? And he stretches it. There's a kind of spectrum in which human beings can be more beastly and still human, and more godlike and still human. And Odysseus, in many ways,
if you draw that out, we'll talk about this probably later, but that's the political question too, right? The broader political question.
And in that chapter, I also begin by pointing out that when Aristotle is writing his Politics, and at the beginning of the Politics, in order to talk about politics, you have to first of all set out, well, what is human nature, right? If we're going to have a politics, we have to understand human nature in order to know what kind of polity is fitting for such creatures. And he begins this process or this exploration of human nature by appeal to Odyssean texts and actual quotes from the Iliad and the Odyssey, and the Cyclops being a really paradigmatic figure of a kind of creature that's not human. And interestingly, the Cyclops is both a beast, obviously, from the film, but also a god. He's the son of Poseidon. Yeah. So he's kind of non-human in both dimensions. Right. He's both like the ultimate beast and a kind of ultimate kind of uncaring, Greek god, in the sense that he can just be oblivious in his condition as a kind of god. So yes, it's a political question as well, because unless we understand what we are as human beings in terms of this negotiation between the beastly and the divine, we can't get our politics right. And I think if you want to talk about contemporary implications, this is the debate between a kind of certain left and a certain right today, right? So of course the left would make the argument, well, we are kind of capable of being gods, and politics is what, if we get our politics right, we can become, in a sense, perfected. This is progressivism. Progressivism is the view that we can progress into these more perfected creatures.
So you put the tech group in there too? Or the tech?
Yeah, well, I think transhumanism is like maybe one of the ultimate kinds of progressivism, in the sense that we can sort of technologically perfect ourselves, and indeed perhaps even replace ourselves with a more perfect creature AI. So that's one view of what humans are. And here I'll say some critical words about the political right as it's been constituted, which is that, no, we are creatures that are so imperfect, that are so fallen and so brutish, so self-interested, so motivated by self-interest, that all we can do is have a politics that kind of either restrains or channels those base animalistic instincts that drive us. And I think that's been so much of the kind of view of the political right, in terms of seeing the American political order only as a kind of Calvinist.
I was just going to ask real quick. We don't have to get deep into it if you don't want to, but as you were talking, I thought a lot of the people who came to America, the Puritans, they were Calvinists. They were pretty hardcore Calvinists, and yet
indeed they were.
What they created, what came of their, even Jonathan Edwards, hardcore Calvinist and one of the most influential Americans in history throughout the 1800s.
Sinners in the hands of an angry God.
Right.
Yeah.
What is that dynamic? Because how did those guys create America? I don't get that.
Well, I think this Calvinist element is just undeniable. And one need only look at some very critical passages in one of our most Calvinist founding fathers, the one who was educated at Princeton University, like the ultimate Calvinist institution, right? Orange being one of its primary colors, which is James Madison. And if you read particularly Madison's articulations of what human nature is, so what does Madison say in the Federalist Papers? What is government itself but the greatest of all reflections on human nature? He starts where Aristotle starts, in a sense. Like, we can't figure out what government is and what politics is required until we establish what our human nature is. And by Madison's telling, our human nature is fundamentally self-interested, right? We can't rely on, right? What does he say? One can't rely on religious or moral motives when one thinks of a government. It's nice if it's there. Yeah. But you can't rely on it. Yeah. It's not consistent. Therefore, what's consistent? Well, self-interest. Therefore, ambition must be made to counteract ambition, he writes. That the Constitution is basically, it's a machinery that assumes that the fuel is always going to be self-interest. And that fuel is endless in human beings. It's a kind of perpetual motion machine that can run on this fuel. And of course, that's also the view of our economy, that our economics is based on this fuel of self-interest. And so you could say that the American, at least one aspect of the American founding, reflects this more, let's say, view of humans in this more bestial light. And right. And so, my own view is, I guess, more Odyssean and more Aristotelian, which is the navigation between the Scylla and Charybdis of our temptations requires us to recognize that there's some truth as well as falsehood in both of these understandings. And then what kind of politics arises from that understanding?
Can I ask, and we'll talk about Dorothy and as we're discussing these new things coming up. Pilgrim's Progress. Do you see that as any sort of because that's, again, Paul, he's major Calvinist, the Puritan. Does that have any connection to Odysseus and like the journey? And
yeah, that's interesting. I actually, at some point in my dissertation, I considered writing on Pilgrim's Progress. And I again, one has to make decisions when one writes. So I haven't gone back and looked at it, but I certainly considered it as I think any kind of post-Odyssean portrayal of a journey by someone who is steeped in the Western tradition, as Bunyan was, would, of course, have the Odyssey as part of the kind of backdrop assumptions. Now, of course, now you have to add in layers and folds of Christianity and a lot of other stories. So there are lots of texts that we could look at from throughout Western tradition that pull on these Odyssean themes. So my invitation to your viewers would be, there's already been one review of this book, which was kind of nasty with the bulwark, and it critiques me for not having included certain texts. I was like, this shouldn't be a kind of like
150 pages.
Right,
how
right.
long do you want this to be? Yeah.
But I would hope that people would say, oh, okay, Deneen talks about these texts. What about this text? And I say, yeah, go for it.
Talk about it.
I mean, I think it's everywhere.
Yep.
I mean, and it ought to be. We ought to see it everywhere. So so I think those who want to take up the baton and talk about Bunyan or talk about Dante or talk about any of so many figures in the Western tradition, it is and ought to be seen everywhere.
Yeah, the only reason I bring that up is just because I've noticed as I've read through some of these guys is that what you're talking about, the view of human nature, the Odyssean view of human nature, maybe doesn't doctrinally add up with the Calvinist perspective, but it does seem to me like Calvinists operate in their life that way sometimes, and that because it's true. I don't know how to. I guess I don't know what I'm getting at here, but that like the doctrine of total depravity. Like I grew up Calvinist. I believe in that, but also the way that you operate, like when you read the Odyssey or when you understand the story, it's sort of like, well, that's kind of how everybody's life is in a lot of ways. Like they're going through this journey to try to get home, and so, I don't know. There's just an interesting dynamic to like there's the written doctrine of like, okay, what's true, and then how does that add up with like how people actually live in their real life, and that's sort of the tension.
Sure.
So,
well, it's to me, it's of course extremely interesting that you could say what we've been describing as these left-right poles, or I've been describing as the left-right poles in American politics. One of them, in some ways, is you could say can trace the more kind of realist, self-interest driven understanding can trace its roots back to a Calvinist understanding. Mm-hmm. And the more progressive understanding can trace its roots back to Calvinists who rebelled against their Calvinism. So the kind of the beginnings of the progressive movement, you can actually trace it back to the kind of transcendentalist movement. And these are all people who grew up in Calvinist, or most of them grew up in Calvinist homes. Like Ralph Waldo Emerson is a really primary example, who grows up in a very Calvinist Congregationalist home. And like many of his generation in the 19th century, are rebelling against what they see as these kind of just strictures of and predestination, making it impossible to think that I can have any kind of kind of responsibility and agency in my own actions. And so the rebellion against that goes in a kind of almost the opposite direction. So you could say that whether we're talking about kind of the old Calvinism or the rebels against Calvinism, we're still in a kind of weirdly Calvinist frame in American politics.
That is true. Yeah. So talk about Dorothy.
Okay, there's a transition.
I mean, we can keep going into the Calvinist, and it's interesting. But I think the stories that you bring into here, and again, this is like opening a whole new world for me. And I think for a lot of younger people who grew up in the get rid of Western, culture, get rid of the Western canon. Don't read that stuff. That's bad and dangerous. And then here's Perks of Being a Wallflower. That's what that's what we read, and it was terrible. So, Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. Yeah. What's the connection?
So after discussing some of the beasts and gods, I talk about Cyclops and a number of the other sort of famous episodes of the Odyssey. Then in the second half of that chapter, talk about the Wizard of Oz. And I talk about the Wizard of Oz both as a film and maybe even a little bit more as the book. So there will be many people who will know the film, far fewer who probably will have read the book. It's worth picking up. It's a very easy book to read. Like the Odyssey film, there's a lot in the book that doesn't make it or is ultimately cut or doesn't appear in the film.
Did you say in the book that you thought the film was better? This is one instance where it's better.
Yeah. So actually, I quote Salman Rushdie, who wrote a short little book on the Wizard of Oz. It's very interesting. His book is an interesting book, and I agree with him in this respect that the book in the book, The Wizard of Oz by L. Frank Baum, Dorothy is a kind of very one-dimensional figure. Specifically, that Dorothy, from the very moment she is whisked away to Oz, she just wants to return home. There's no longing in her for anything else. She's someone who is just a kind of homebody. And in the film, of course, the very opening scenes of the film, there's the very moving scene and the famous scene in which she sings the song Somewhere Over the Rainbow, one of the iconic, of course, Hollywood songs and Americana. Yeah. And that sets up, of course, I think the movie and the dynamics of the film, which is, okay, this is a young woman. We all recognize this. You're talking about your generation that wants to leave home. So is she. She's she's you guys, 100 years ago from Kansas, from this black and white world. It's boring. She has to live with her aunt and uncle, and it's a farm. And what does she want? She wants to go to city. She wants to go somewhere over the rainbow.
Too. That's the same situation.
It's get me out of here. I can't stand it. I'm young. These people are old. I want to go somewhere I can spread my wings. Right. So that is a very recognizable, and that's a very Odyssean theme. It's what we've been talking about. So that sets up the dynamic of the film, in which, okay, here she is from this small little, not even a town, a small little farm. It's an unjust world, right? Her dog is confiscated by this terrible figure, and who becomes the witch in the film. So there's not much in some ways to say that why would one want to be in this place, other than perhaps some kind of affection and love that she has for the people there, which that is captured in the film, as well as articulated in the book. Of course, by the end of the film and in the book, she's basically kind of has concluded, well, there's no place like home. My aim and ambition once she gets to Oz is, okay, this is a fantastical place. It's really interesting. She is fascinated by it. But once she arrives in Oz, both in the movie as well as in the book, she decides my project is to return home. And again, this is very Odyssean, right? So she's going to go through these series of adventures that's all featuring gods and beasts, in a sense. If we say the witches and the wizard are kind of the gods, and then there are lots of beasts, including, or fantastical creatures like Tin Men and talking scarecrows and flying monkeys. And there's actually a lot more in the book. There are a lot more fantastical creatures. So it's a very Odyssean kind of journey that she takes in order to return home. And what draws her home ultimately is the love that she has for the family there, for Aunt Em, especially. So it's in some ways you could say it is the most accessible and iconic and probably popular version of that very old Odyssean story. That's basic dynamic of longing for something, and yet, in spite of that longing, finding one's way home in order to return to the people that one loves.
I think you mentioned in your book the East and the West, and how Dorothy is sort of representative of the Middle America, Midwestern. What is that? Can you explain that a little bit? Because the Wicked Witch of the East and there's a Wicked Witch of the West. What did that represent?
Well, I mean, I don't think I talk about this in the book, but there are these longstanding, really interesting interpretations of the Wizard of Oz that place it in very much a kind of 19th century political context in which sort of the East Coast and the West Coast are like where the evil things are, and Middle America, represented by Dorothy, is the kind of the wholesome, virtuous, and of course this is all leading up to the kind of populist election. William Jennings Bryan is kind of in the wings, and in fact, by some interpretations, it's a tract supporting William Jennings Bryan in the populist movement, because of course William Jennings Bryan is trying to get America off the gold standard, and the silver standard is more attractive for the farmers who need to borrow money at less, make money a little more available. Topics we're familiar with today. So if you take us off the gold standard, in the book, Dorothy is wearing a set of silver shoes. The Wicked Witch of the East has silver shoes, and so she has to go over the yellow brick road, the kind of gold standard, with her silver shoes to bring her home. So it's a kind of argument for going away from the gold, like walking over the gold with the silver standard.
Was that imposed? Like was that the author's intent?
Well, as I just mentioned, these are all interpretations.
Analyses. Okay, got it.
And so even gets to the point where the Scarecrow represents the sort of farming interest. The Tin Woodman is the industrial. It represents the industrial era, or the industrial part of the country. And the Cowardly Lion is William Jennings Bryan, who just won't commit to running for president. So there is this kind of this really great, interesting tradition of interpreting it as a kind of political allegory of the late 19th century. I don't talk about any of this in the book.
I think as I was doing research, I was reading, and then I was East and West, and then we went and saw Wicked. I hated that. I left halfway through. I don't know. Anyways, I did not like that at all, but not the movie, the play. We watched the play. I wasn't a big fan of that. But who or what does the Wizard of Oz actually represent?
Yeah. Well, this is actually, I think, the most interesting aspect of at least my rereading of the book in particular, and then thinking about it in relation to the film. The Wizard of Oz seems to me to be a figure in the book especially who represents the yearning to be like a god. And in some ways you could say comes pretty close to submitting to that. In the book, he is portrayed as a figure who has, he's accidentally, like the balloon takes him into Oz, and he is treated by the kind of quasi, not quite fully human creatures that greet him. They're actually in Oz, in the book, they're about the same size as the Munchkins. So they're not complete humans. They're kind of half humans, and they see this creature, coming from heaven, basically in the balloon, and they greet him as a god. Yeah. And he embraces this. He sort of almost quasi enslaves them and forces them to build him a city, the Emerald City, right? The city made of green, right? And they worship him as a kind of quasi god. They fear him. You see a bit of this in the film. Like he's like, oh, the great and terrible Oz. But he's a figure of real terror for the Ozmites, and he encourages this salutary fear among these quasi-humans. He is in competition with the witches in the book. He actually, apparently there is a war that takes place between him and the Wicked Witch of the West. He loses the war, because the witch controls the flying monkeys, and so he has to retreat to the land of Oz. But if he could have assumed the powers of the witches, he would have. And the witches are really much more vicious, even in the book, than they are in the movie. They are, especially the Wicked Witch of the West, basically wants to murder the four figures, the Dorothy and she enslaves entire populations. So she's a very vicious character. And what's quite interesting in the book, and I mentioned this in my book, she has only one eye. Mm-hmm. So she's like an echo of the kind of Cyclops, the god beast. So she's a very much, I think, a kind of a throwback and an echo to the one-eyed creature of the Odyssey.
What do you think of Wicked then? Because I think my frustration with Wicked was the same as with the Joker movie, Joaquin Phoenix. I don't know if you watched that.
Yeah, I think I did, but I don't remember it well.
I felt like both of them were sort of trying to make you. It felt like the over psychologized, like, you were spanked as a kid, that's why you ended up being a bad person or whatever. And it's like it just was like the Wicked Witch of the West and the Joker. We have to psychoanalyze them and understand why they became the bad people they became. And I don't know. I'm not interested in that as much, but what did you think of Wicked?
So I think that it reflects something you see a lot in popular culture today, which is the desire to muddy what used to be the good and evil story, the moral story. Yeah. And The Wizard of Oz is in many ways a sort of moralistic story, which is that good defeats evil. Right? Dorothy is the good girl. She represents the heartland of America, and she defeats the Wicked Witch of the East in this case, and the Wicked Witch of the West. So it's a kind of simple morality tale, but it's a satisfying morality tale that good triumphs over evil. And of course, what Wicked is, and I would actually go so far as to say, in some ways, there's a temptation in the Odyssey film in the same direction, because Odysseus becomes. Yes. Is he a bad guy because he defeats the Trojans, right? Yeah. But there's
it's a postmodern.
It's a postmodern muddying of the morality tale. Basically, say it's all gray. It's which is fitting for the Nolan film, because it's kind of all gray in the Nolan film.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
I will say, in defense of Nolan's film, ultimately is that the suitors really are the bad guys. And it's very satisfying to watch Odysseus beat the bad guys. So at least he wasn't tempted to sort of make them into these sort of potentially good guys.
That was cool.
Yes, it was. That was very satisfying. And let me just make a throwback here to what I said earlier. We know they're bad guys because they mistreat Odysseus's dog.
Right.
That's the sign of a bad human being. so true, I was like absolutely rooting for Odysseus to defeat them, because they mistreated.
They threw him on the dung pile.
They kick him and then they throw him on the dung. This old 20-year-old dog.
Right.
And I was like, yes, kill them.
And the thing you didn't get from the movie too was the sense, I don't know if this is a spoiler or not, but just that when Odysseus returns, the way that his son in the movie knew that it was Odysseus is because of his interaction with the dog at the end. And
I see that's a change to the text, right? So Odysseus reveals himself to his son while they're at the farm of the pig keeper Eumaeus. But that, to me, that was not a loss. In fact, in some ways, I actually think it was a touching scene in which Telemachus, who's been caring for the dog, sees the dog's, like in his dying breath, the dog's joy, just the tail wagging of this weak, dying dog on the dung heap, who recognizes his master, Telemachus's father, and dies of a kind of joy at that moment. And witnessing that, Telemachus then recognizes his father. I thought that was really that worked. I thought that worked.
Yeah, that was a good scene.
Anything involving Argos was really good in this film.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you do talk about in your book, The Field of Dreams, and the idea of the ordinary man. And this is a part of the book where I think I cried like 10 times while reading it. So
that's amazing.
It was, I couldn't stop crying. Just the ordinary man and how one inning has changed the world like that. It's all kind of like, it's a little like sappy or whatever, but you're like, no, that's true. That like happened that, and I think it used to happen more in our country. Like as somebody growing up in the weird time that we live in, I didn't see that as much of these sorts of men who like just did the right thing. They didn't bail or leave.
Well, we should maybe say what you're talking about.
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah. Explain
so
that.
A subsequent chapter, I think 2 chapters after the one we've been talking about, I devote to the theme of ordinary people, of what I see as, again, a major theme in the Odyssey that does appear in the film. I think it does appear in the film. It's especially in the character of Eumaeus and also the nurse who appears in the film. And what I underscore in the discussion of the Odyssey section of that chapter is that the Odyssey is maybe the first of the great works of the Western, civilization, in which of course, it centers on the heroic, the noble-born. It's an aristocratic society. It features kings and princes, and the great heroes are often the children of gods or have a lineage to the gods. So that's very much a part of that civilization. But it also features the nobility of ordinary people, and the nobility in particular when Odysseus returns back to Ithaca. The figures who assist him are not the noble, high-born people of Ithaca per se. In fact, those are kind of now the enemies. These are the suitors. These are the high-born children of the families who are still in Ithaca, who are really quite horrible, right? They are the breakers of the laws of hospitality. They are the abusers of the home of Odysseus. They seek and plot the murder of Telemachus. So in that sense, the film, Nolan's film, is quite good.
That's very American. The American rebellion against the British Empire.
Yeah. So absolutely. So the Odyssey portrays that. Yes, we tend to see nobility corresponding to the highborn people. So in the Iliad, this is all a war being fought by the highborn, the nobility, the princes, and so forth. But what the Odyssey shows us is that, we still have these highborn people who are the noblemen, but we also have these noblemen who are vicious. They can be bad people, right? So the suitors arguably should be the nobles, the highborn, the people who bear nobility, but they're actually quite vicious. And we also discover that there are some lowborn or some menial figures in the text. Eumaeus, who is keeper of the swine, who actually in the text sleeps with the swine. He's has to go out into the pig pen to sleep. And the keeper of the oxen, the nurse who washes the feet of Odysseus. I mean, these are extremely menial tasks. And these are some of the noblest figures in the epic. These become the warrior companions of Odysseus. These people fight. This is not portrayed in the film, but these people fight alongside Odysseus when he's fighting against the suitors. So for the first time in the Western tradition, we see the following possibility. Who you are as a human being does not correspond to your birthplace.
Your bloodline. Yeah.
Your bloodline.
Interesting.
Right. And so you could say this is one of the most proto-American phenomenon imaginable, right? We'll judge you not by the color of your skin or the parents you're born to, but by the content of your character. Yeah. And that's seems to me, that's like the proto-American. And
they were the first, in the movie at least, they were the first ones to recognize him. The Odysseus has returned.
Well, they're the first one. Eumaeus is, I guess, the second person he reveals himself to. Right. The first one is Telemachus. Right. The nurse recognizes, and it's good in the film they do this. The nurse recognizes him because of a scar on his leg that he had received as an injury as a younger man. So the recognition of Odysseus is sort of parceled out between some noble people, Telemachus in particular, but it's mostly the ordinary people.
Is that a nod to the idea that like the ordinary person who's doing the right thing, sort of the moral ordinary man, is able to recognize who truly belongs in the position of power and authority in some sense? Or what does that mean specifically?
Well, I think here you have to put on a pretty thick interpretive lens because, the text is not telling us exactly what this means. But I think in some ways the Odyssey describes, if the Iliad is all about the war that results from the disorder in the home, right? It originates in the disorder of the bedroom, of the adultery of Helen and Paris. The Odyssey describes kind of the aftermath of that disorder, which is that the disorder is especially experienced in the harshest, most brutal, unbearable way by ordinary people. Right? This disorder it has now spread everywhere. It's the war has not ended in Troy. Even though Troy is destroyed, it's continuing because its reverberations, like any war, right, continue home. Right, the home is still in disorder, and that's of course portrayed in the return of Agamemnon to his home, in which his wife has been, unfaithful to him, and that is portrayed in the film. And he's murdered on his homecoming. So the victorious, like the general who's the leader of the entire expedition, he's murdered by his wife and home. So the disorder of the bedroom now continues. It's manifested itself in the battlefield, but now it's manifesting itself on the home front. And Ithaca is disordered. Yeah. Ithaca is in disarray. There's no politics in Ithaca, right? There's been no assembly, at least in the text, there's been no assembly. There's been no public meeting. There's been no political order in Ithaca. It's now just ravenous, supposedly noble-born people just kind of devouring from the home of the ruling family, and the servants are suffering. The servants...
I mean, that's like America post-war. It's in a way,
you could say
generalized.
You could say this is kind of, it again reflects our politics today, that the highborn or in some ways the elites are doing very well, and the ordinary people are not doing that well. And this is going to reverberate in our politics. I think you could also say, here I'll editorialize, but we are now experiencing profound disorder in our familial organization and arrangements, and that's going to be manifest in our political order. So I think this old story has present day applications. So in many ways, the conclusion of the Odyssey is about the restoration of order in which ordinary people play a significant role. Right? I mean, it's the swineherd and the oxherd and the nurse who become Odysseus's army against the nobility.
Yeah. And so how does that match up with the Field of Dreams story?
So doesn't match as it's not a perfect match, but what I really wanted to emphasize in the Field of Dreams, like film I love, I think a lot of Americans love that film, and you can't talk about the Odyssey and Homecoming without baseball because it's the iconic American sport in which the purpose and end of the sport is to go home. Yeah, so it is it's the most Odyssean of all sports imaginable. Yeah. Like
that's so funny. Yeah,
of course, it's worth underscoring that it's the only sport. I think maybe cricket, but I don't know cricket, but it's certainly the only sport I know of in which the object is to go home, and the way that you score is by going out on a journey through perilous
you never know what you're going to
places. You don't know what you're going to encounter. You got to go. You got to take this circuit, and you score a point by a human being reaching home. It's not a ball going through a net or crossing a boundary or a goal.
Do you think like the subconscious of Western civilization created that?
I
basically?
think absolutely.
Yeah, okay,
absolutely.
That's cool.
No, it's the most iconic American sport because it's about going out, wayfaring, and coming home. And you get a point for getting home.
Right. That's so cool.
And you need help to get home often. You got to get an assist or get a run batted in. Right. So
some people sacrifice their run
for absolutely to get somebody home. Yeah. No, it's really I mean, is there any more metaphorically Odyssean sport?
Read Odyssey once, and you don't need to watch any more baseball.
Or read, watch baseball and you're experiencing the Odyssey. And so, but I've always loved the Field of Dreams. As most Americans do, because of course it's a great story. Talk about tearjerker. You can't help but cry at the end of that movie when he's having a catch with his dad. But I've always been especially interested in the figure of Archibald Moonlight Graham, who's of course beautifully played by Burt Lancaster, his last role before he passed away. And I began reading a little bit about the figures in the book, and I read both the original story on which the movie was based, which the book was based, and then the book on which the movie was based. So the original story is Shoeless Joe Comes to Iowa, I think it's called. That might be incorrect, but it's something like that. Shoeless Joe Comes to Iowa or Goes to Iowa. The name of the book was just Shoeless Joe. The short story was successful and got noticed, and so he turned it into a book. The expanded story, his working title wasn't Shoeless Joe. His working title was now I'm forgetting. It's in my book, but it is it's about.
Let me look it up.
You gotta look it up. Okay.
Yeah. Because that was an important.
Yeah. It's about J.D. Salinger. So those who know the film will know that James Earl Jones plays a character named Terrence Mann, this author in Boston who's kind of an icon in the 1960s.
Dreamfield? No, not that. Mm-hmm. Before the kidnapping of J.D. Salinger.
The kidnapping of J.D. Salinger. That's the working title of the novel, is The Kidnapping of J.D. Salinger. So that's the kidnapping. What in the film becomes the kidnapping of Terrence Mann, the James Earl Jones character. Yeah. So in the novel, it's not Terrence Mann, it's J.D. Salinger. So Salinger is the author that Ray Kinsella goes to kidnap and bring to the game at Fenway Park, and then who accompanies him up to Chisholm, Minnesota. So notice that two of these three figures in the book were real life human beings, right? Shoeless Joe Jackson, J.D. Salinger. And what about the third one that sort of gets involved in this? And it's Archibald Moonlight Graham. Well, he was a real person. Yeah. And the author of the book, W.P. Kinsella, comes across this score, this sort of biographical line score of the statistics of this figure named Archibald, quote, Moonlight, nicknamed Moonlight Graham, when he's reading Bill James' Baseball Encyclopedia, and he sees the line score that you see in the film. This is a guy who plays one inning of one game and has zeros all the way across. He never gets to go to bat. He comes out for in the ninth inning. He plays one game, and then he never plays baseball again. So his entire major league record is one inning and zero of anything else. And I think Kinsella just got interested in, who is this person that just kind of got clearly, he came close, he played one inning, and then never heard from again. And I think the name Moonlight was kind of, intriguing.
Like
who
legend.
Is this guy?
Yeah.
So he goes to look him up. And it's a little bit like in the film. They discover he's a guy, he was a real guy who lived up in way north Minnesota, up close to the Canadian border, Chisholm, Minnesota. And he and I think a companion, like in the film, the author, Kinsella, goes up to Minnesota to try to find out about this guy. And like in the film, they find their way to the newspaper. They talk to the real life editor of the newspaper, who's also portrayed in the film. And they find out that this guy is just as he was portrayed in the movie. He was a small town doctor who stopped playing baseball and devoted his life and was extraordinary in terms of what he gave to the community. He was one of these figures like that I think every small town and hamlet and city in America has been blessed to have at some point in their history, and who memorializes often as part of that. But then as the years go by, they tend to forget about them. But those towns and those places wouldn't be the same if that person hadn't lived there. And so this is an ordinary person that nobody knows about or people forget, who made a huge difference in the life of that place.
He gave his money to kids so that they could.
He did,
and made sure everybody had food. And there was some tough economic years in the town. And
I mean, he was he would give free medical care. He gave free glasses to kids. He would always carry candy in his pockets and give it to kids. He actually engaged in a long-term study of childhood diseases, which was published and became a standard for a while up there close to, what's the name of the town? Rochester, Minnesota, where the Mayo Clinic is. So he was like one of these just stalwarts in this community. And his character in the film, just to speak of the film now, I think he's the true hero of the film. And I would argue of the book as well, but he's the true hero of the film. If you watch the film, you tend to think, okay, Kevin Costner's good looking, he's charismatic. Right. That's the hero.
Right.
You tend to think, okay, that Kevin Costner's the hero. But I think there's no character in the film who commits or engages in a genuine act of extraordinary self-sacrifice, a kind of heroic self-sacrifice, like the one that Moonlight Graham does in the film. Because if you'll remember, again, spoiler alert if you haven't seen the film, but Moonlight has been now miraculously kind of reincarnated, appears as a young man for the first time now, being able to go and play Major League Baseball and to be able to go up to the plate and hit. Right. And it's this iconic moment, both in the film and in the book. He gets to go up, wink at the pitcher, get brushed back twice, and then has a sac fly and gets an RBI. And in the film, it's very satisfying. Right. And so the suggestion is that now this young, the reincarnated Archibald Moonlight Graham on the field of dreams will be able to live the fantasy he wasn't able to live in life, which is to be a professional baseball player, to play alongside these great, old, iconic, heroic baseball figures.
That's the immortality.
That's immortality. Yeah. Right. So he has the offer of immortality. Yeah. He's like Odysseus, gets the offer of immortality. And then in a sequence that happens in the book and in the film, the daughter of Kinsella falls or is thrown or pushed off of the bleachers and is choking to death. And there's no way that she can be safe. She's going to die. This is very easily could have been a tragic story, and nobody knows what to do. And in the film, I think the film is so moving. Kinsella, Kevin Costner's character, looks at young Archie Graham, just looks at him. And Archie doesn't hesitate. He runs, crosses the foul line. His glove becomes a medical bag. His cleat becomes a black shoe. And he's now old Burt Lancaster, Doc Graham. And he steps out. He discovers the child's choking, has some hot dog lodged in her throat, kind of hits her back a couple times, and says she's going to be fine, and it's kind of happy ending, and then suddenly the stricken look is on Kinsella's face, Kevin Costner's face. You can't go back. Mm-hmm. He says, "It's okay, son. It's okay." Right. And it's just this devastating moment in which you realize this kind of he's given up his immortality, and he says, "I've got to be going now. My wife, Alicia is going to think I have another girl." There's a line he says earlier. And he walks out, of course, to the iconic, corn wall of corn stalks to step out into whatever lies behind. And at that moment, Shoeless Joe Jackson, played by Ray Liotta, stops him. He says, hey, rookie. And Burt Lancaster looks back. And Ray Liotta says, "You were good." And watch that moment. Go back and watch that moment if you haven't seen the film, or if you have seen the film. Watch Lancaster's face when Liotta says, "You were good." I mean, it's hard not to cry when you see that.
Hard not to cry talking about it, yeah.
His face goes through gratification, regret, joy, sadness in like about a second. It's an extraordinary, it's a great actor. And then he leaves. He departs without another word. And notice what he had said. You were good. So you were a good baseball player.
Right.
But of course, you were good.
Yeah.
You were a good human being.
You're a good man. Yeah.
You're a good man. I just think he's the most heroic character in that text that features Shoeless Joe Jackson and J.D. Salinger in the book. And he's the most ordinary human being. Yeah. He could be Eumaeus the swineherd. Right. He's just a small town doctor that nobody would have heard about except for that one line score in Bill James's baseball encyclopedia. None of us would know of, would have ever heard of, would know anything about this man if just by happenstance he hadn't appeared in this book and then been made into a character in this film.
Was there the line, I think you put it in there, that just one inning can change the world or whatever? That
that's
was
actually in the movie.
That's in the movie. Yeah, that's what I think. That's what got me, because it's like it's an inversion of the whole idea. It's like everybody thinks professional baseball, professionals, whatever it is, like getting to that grand stage is the main point, and his character through a life of sacrifice, it's not the main point.
And so this touches on a theme that, now relating to something you said earlier. I've taught at very elite institutions my entire life: Princeton, Georgetown. Now we're a couple blocks from Notre Dame, and I have a lot of students who struggle and they agonize over the question: where should I live? What should I do with my life? Of course, a young person struggles with that. And of course, you get into institutions like these that I've been very blessed to teach at. They're ambitious, and they're directed to the great cities and, ambitious jobs. And some of them will become really significant figures. I had Pete Hegseth as a student at Princeton.
Right.
He was not my direct student, but I was a thesis advisor when he was a student of mine, or when I was a professor there. But so you can see the trajectory of some of these students is really, they are going to make a big impact. But for a lot of students, I think, at least I try to counsel them, you can go and be, in all likelihood, have an interesting job in a big city, typically, working in finance in New York City, or getting a job working in Washington, D.C., maybe as a lobbyist or something, in which you are not necessarily going to make a huge difference.
You might think you are while you're doing it.
You might think you are. Yeah. You're not necessarily going to make a huge difference. So you could consider taking your considerable talents to a smaller place of the country where your talents are going to make a huge difference in the lives of that particular place. And the question is what's the nature of what it is you want to contribute, what it is you want to do with your. So I'm not saying it's appropriate for every one of my students or everyone who's thinking about these kinds of questions to simply go off to South Bend, Indiana, and become mayor and someday president. No.
Well, it's also like, what do you want out of it? Because I think a lot of people are just thinking about the money. Well, how much am I going to make? And it's just that sort of unmitigated capitalism. Like, that's the goal of life, is to make money and have a nice car and a nice house. And I mean, that just isn't the goal of life. And also what you get out of giving something to giving yourself to something that's seems insignificant. I say that with air quotes because it's not insignificant, but seemingly insignificant, a town that nobody knows about or whatever, even to your own family.
I guess I have a somewhat skewed experience of this because I don't teach in the business school. Oh. Now, it's true that a lot of students, no matter what they're majoring in, are just going to want to make a lot of money.
Yeah.
But and maybe, again, I'm skewed also because I'm at Notre Dame, and maybe that just draws a different kind of student. Of course, they want financial security.
For sure. Yeah.
I mean, and that would be stupid not to want a degree of financial security. Right. But at least the kinds of students that I tend to encounter, they recognize that, yes, financial security is important, but so are things like being able to have a family and being able to have not just be able to afford a house, but live in a community,
right,
and have a job that matters, in which I'm going to make some kind of a difference. So, and what all I'm saying is that in much of the kind of, you could say what's fed to our elites, these are elites in formation. What's fed to them is that you should try to get the highest ranking, most important, most influential job possible, partly for the money. But a lot of my students go and work on Capitol Hill. They're not going to make a lot of money. It's power, that's influence.
Yeah. Right.
But very few people have told them, maybe you should look at something, making a difference in, think about somebody like Doc Graham. Make a difference in a place where you will have been among the most important people ever to have lived in that place. You might have a statue erected to you. You might have a street named after you. Doc Graham now is celebrated in Chisholm, Minnesota, not partly because of the movie, but one of the things that I like to do when I go give talks in colleges around the country is to to go around town and to find out a little bit about some of the, like, who are buildings named for? What are streets named for? Who's this park named for? You know, sometimes it's something as small as like a park bench will have the name inscribed on it. And then I do a little bit of research, and, you know, I find out, okay, this person was, you know, he was a local lawyer who, you know, supported the local band or something. And I think this is a reflection of the world I grew up in. Sounds a little bit different from the world you grew up in, only just a couple of decades earlier. But I grew up in a small town outside of Hartford, Connecticut, and it was these people who owned small businesses, the local attorneys, doctors, business owners. They were the lifeblood of the community. These are the people who supported all of the things that, at least in my youth, made my youth wonderful. You know, the Little League teams and the local parades and the Boy Scouts, and this was the community, were these people. And what our current organization and sort of, you could say, the current setup is to identify those people today and extract them from those places, to find the Doc Grahams and make sure that they're not going to stay in Chisholm.
Right.
We're gonna take you to Yale, and you're gonna get,
and it hollows out these cities, these towns.
Of course. And so then when my students say, well, what am I going to do in South Bend? Or, you know, maybe South Bend's a nicer place because we have Notre Dame, but what am I going to do? And what am I going to do in, you know, this or that little town, Chisholm, Minnesota? They're right to be concerned about that, because we have emptied them. We've extracted all of the kind of talented people. But maybe we could begin to think of our country as a place that's, you know, God in his wisdom spreads talent widely. And maybe it's not a good idea. We talk about the dangers of the concentration of power. Yes. Maybe it's a bad thing to sort of concentrate talent.
Yeah. Do you have more time? Or?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay, because I do want to talk about George Bailey and It's a Wonderful Life. This is a soul-shattering segment of the book, not in a bad way. It's really interesting. Can you just talk about that? Just who is George Bailey? And people know these things, but George Bailey, Mr. Potter, and sort of that whole concept leading up to the cemetery scene.
So this is the fourth chapter of what are four substantive chapters comparing the Odyssey and iconic American works. So the four are Wizard of Oz, Huckleberry Finn, Field of Dreams, and then It's a Wonderful Life. So these are hopefully not like really obscure texts or films that hopefully most people will know these. And the fourth chapter is titled The Ambivalence of Being Home. And this is, again, I think start with a Nolan film. It's interesting that Nolan, I do think, captures a bit of that, though I think mistakenly. I think he does it in an unfortunate way, that when the suitors are defeated and kind of order is restored, Odysseus and Penelope get on a boat and they leave in order to go west. In one sense, that's really accurate because, as of course has been predicted by Tiresias, both in the film and in the book, Odysseus is going to have to go back out again. Now, in the text, in the original text, he has to go back out again to appease the anger of Poseidon. He has to go find a people that have never seen the ocean before and who will mistake an oar as a winnowing fan, as the kind of fan that, Cleopatra gets cooled with. So in the film, he's to go somewhere, he's to go west in order to honor the dead who were under his command, which now again plays into that anti-war element of the film. So he and Penelope get on a boat and they sail west. And we don't, we just know they're going to chase the setting sun. It's kind of interesting because it plays well into my book, which is that, so if they keep doing that, they'll discover America. So that's kind of cool.
Right.
And that's one of the theses of the book, which is that the early explorers, Columbus, Amerigo Vespucci, were described as Odyssean characters. They were seen as the new Odysseus. And so, as I suggest in the book, metaphorically, America was discovered by Odysseus, and those elements of Odysseus are brought here from from Europe. But the ambivalence of coming home really touches on kind of what happens at the end of the Odyssey, of the text, the Odyssey. Yeah. So order is restored. The gods declare, now there will be no more warfare between peoples. The home and the polis of Ithaca is restored to its rightful status. And Odysseus becomes both, again, husband, father, and king. So it's kind of like the Hollywood ending, happily ever after, roll credits. But this question remains, well, what happens? Is Odysseus content? Is this man who's seen so much of the world? Does he want to be home? I think the film suggests, okay, he just gets up and goes. I think the book's more marvelously ambivalent on this point because he wants to be home, and one can imagine he finds satisfaction in finally being home. But one can also imagine he gets kind of fed up after a while, so I'm going to go back out again and explore a bit. And this plays to what becomes the sort of afterlife the sort of literary afterlife of Odysseus, in which a lot of subsequent tellings of what happens after the conclusion of the text, the Odyssey, portray Odysseus as traveling out again, including Dante's Inferno, which he goes out and, sort of hubristically sails to the base of the Mount of Purgatorio and then is struck down by God. And that's how he ends up in the 8th circle of hell.
Yeah, he's like he's in betrayal. He's in the center.
He's in the 8th circle, which is the bad counsel.
Evil counsel.
Really?
I didn't. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. But he's pretty low. But his story, the story that he tells from the flames, is really one of hubris and one of sort of seeking beyond what mortals should seek. Yeah. And so it is a story of that Odyssean side of him of wanting more than he should want. And so I think that there's a whole after literary kind of Odysseus that suggests that homecoming is always ambivalent. And here I really discuss the ways in which I think all of us, even if we love our homes and want to return to our homes, after a time you find it to be not what you remembered. Yeah. It's not quite what I thought it was. It's like that great American title by Thomas Wolfe, You Can't Go Home Again. You can be in the same house, you can go to the same building you grew up in, seems smaller and it seems dingier, and it's just not the same.
The movie, oh my goodness, it's the famous West after the Civil War, Southern antebellum.
Cold Mountain?
No, it's the most famous American movie, and I literally cannot.
Gone with the Wind.
Sorry,
Okay.
Gone with the Wind.
Gone with the Wind. Yeah, You Can't Go Home Again.
Yeah, the first act, and then you get to the second. I remember watching that as a kid, being like, you just feel weird. It just feels strange. It's not the same.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, so I discuss a bit this sort of literary afterlife of Odysseus and his own, the suggestions of what will happen after he returns home. And I pair that with, in one sense, a kind of a strange pairing. In another sense, I hope an appropriate one, which is It's a Wonderful Life. Yeah. And the reason it's a strange pairing is because George Bailey, of course, famously played by Jimmy Stewart, beautifully played by Jimmy Stewart, is the anti-Odysseus. He's someone who never leaves home. He never gets to go on the journey.
No matter how hard he tries.
No matter how hard he tries. It's like he can't get out of this town, right? But I do think he's a fitting figure because he expresses from the youngest age, the first time we see him in Mr. Gower's pharmacy as a young boy, he's talking about National Geographic magazine with Mary and how he wants to get out and have a harem and he wants to travel all over the world. True, and Mary's like, I don't like hearing all that. Yeah. And every time we see him, subsequently, he's always I'm going to travel. Right, the next time we see him, right, he's getting a suitcase. He's going to see the world. Yes. He's going to go to all these famous cities. He's going to cover the suitcase with all these stickers, and he's he wants to get out, right? The next scene, he's about to go off to college, and his father, is stricken with a stroke from which he passes away. So every time he's about to leave, something prevents him. And there's a fate to preventing him from being the Odyssean explorer, which he wants to be. But he expresses this very Odyssean longing for more, to get out, to explore, to see the unknown, to encounter the strange and the unforeseeable.
You say he wants to build cities. He wanted.
Well, of course, that's the other element, which is that he has this desire of transforming the world, of making something new. And this is a very mid 20th century, right? This is a post-war movie, and this is kind of we are now going to be this great, powerful. We're going to transform the world. So it's not just that he wants to build things; he wants to build the most transformative kinds of buildings or structures. If you remember the line, I think you just said it right. I'm going to build bridges a mile long and buildings a mile high. We're going to build skyscrapers and massive new transportation system. So this is the transformation of the entire American environment.
That desire after the war, obviously it came from winning the war, but do you think more particularly from the creation of the atomic bomb, there's this sort of idea that like what can't we do? We just created this.
No, I think, and again, I would argue coming out of this book as well, it's been there from the start.
It's been there from the start. Yeah.
No, I mean,
it was amplified after the war though a little bit, or
of course. I mean, or you could say it takes a new form. Yes, it's amplified. But there's always a kind of deep embrace of technology as transformative. I mean, read Benjamin Franklin, right? That's there.
Yeah, that's true.
The kind of this belief in the human capacity to control, master, transform nature, that's built into the American ethos. And so George Bailey's just kind of a more contemporary articulation of that, certainly expressing kind of post-World War II confidence and optimism about that transformation. But I think that's a fitting way then to discuss how that ambivalence toward being in Bedford Falls is reflected in George Bailey. So I think, on the one, I don't want to minimize how much he comes to love Bedford Falls because he clearly does, right?
Because of his wife in a lot of ways,
and it's very Odyssean Penelope, right? It's he comes to embrace this town that he really has a kind of something of a condescending dismissiveness toward through much of the movie because of the anchor that Mary represents, right? That she anchors him to this place. Now, an anchor is double-edged, right? It gives me solidity, it gives me stability, but it also prevents me from moving.
Right. Well, that's seen in the scene where you throw the rock at the old house, and she loves the house, and he's like, "That's old house."
And he makes the ultimate the mistake we all know you make. You shouldn't make when you make a wish. Don't tell anybody what you wish. Exactly. He tells us what he wishes. I want to go places. I want to see the world. I want to, and she makes a wish, and we know what she wishes.
Right.
But she doesn't say it out loud. Right. Yeah. She wants to marry George and settle down and live in that house. Yeah. And she gets her wish, and George doesn't get his wish. Yeah.
What does that mean, real quick? Just why is it? Is it just this there's such an ambition inside of him, he can't even contain it, and that sort of not being able to maintain that sort of destroys it, or what is that? Why is it that she's quiet about it, she doesn't say?
Right.
And
so in my book, one of the things I really emphasize is that the Odyssean tension between wanting to see more, wanting to experience more, wanting to have that experience of the divine and the beastly, and to experience that which human beings have never seen before and known, to listen to the song of the sirens, to encounter a goddess who offers you immortality, to be tempted by all of these. And again, the movie really doesn't give you that sense, but this is very much in the text. There's real possibilities of some alternate life that Odysseus could lead that would be wondrous and amazing, but also potentially deadly, right? That's certainly, you could say, a constitutive part of the American soul, is this desire for more. I mean, everyone who comes here, who gets on a boat from Europe and travels here under very arduous circumstances in the 19th century, is coming here in the hope of experiencing something more. And everyone who picked up stakes to go west and to find something new, to discover something new. This is the American spirit. But when you would leave Europe or you would leave South Bend to go west, right? This is the home of Studebaker, which made the wagons where people would go west. Yeah. This is like the jumping off point for the westward move. What do they do? Well, some of them are just prospectors and explorers, but a lot of them were pioneers who became settlers. Yeah. And you would settle down and you would make a home. And so you could say that scene with Mary and George is the American dilemma. Yeah. It's the American moment. George wants to go out and explore, and Mary wants to settle and make a home.
It's also the male-female dynamic.
It's male-female. Yeah. It's Pa Ingalls and Ma Ingalls.
Yeah, right. That's true. I never even thought about that. That's so true.
This is like Little House on the Prairie. Yeah. I could have a whole chapter on that because Pa is always like, okay, I see other human beings. Right. Let's move.
Yeah, that's like where we read the little picture ones to our kids right now, and Pa's always wants to move.
He always wants to move, and as soon as they move, Ma's like, okay, I'm going to start making a roof, and we're gonna make clear a floor. Right. So this is this dynamic is portrayed often as two opposite characters. So Pa and Ma Ingalls or George and Mary Bailey. But I would suggest, like Odysseus, it's always internal too. Yeah. It's an internal dynamic. It's in each of our souls. Now we might tend more toward one or the other. So Mary's going to be more one, George is going to be more the other. But George is able to acclimate himself and indeed to embrace his role as a great contributor to this town. He's in a sense the version of Moonlight Graham for Bedford Falls.
Only thing that stands between Potter and total authoritarianism or whatever. Yeah, right. I mean, I don't know if that's how you look at it, but I mean, Potter's tendencies are that direction. So
and again, now I'm going to do something I said one shouldn't do. I'm going to muddy the waters. Yes, so it's of course we are right to read. In this case, to see the film and see it's a tale of good and evil with George against Mr. Potter. And I don't want to deny that, but there's an ambivalence to George, and it's I think ultimately reflected in what I think has been consistently a deep ambivalence toward his own home, which I think in some ways he never ceases in some ways to want to transcend. And then maybe you could say this is a very American thing. We always want to transcend whatever it is that we might have. There's always a lack or a want in whatever it is we actually experience in our particular place. And so this desire of improving and progress is a very American characteristic. And so I think George embodies you could say a very positive American quality of progress and improvement. But the way in which that's ultimately manifest is deeply ambivalent. And it's ambivalent in the same way that as we question whether Odysseus would find Ithaca satisfying, I think we ultimately have to say that George may not find Bedford Falls to be satisfying. And in his justified efforts to prevent and to correct the evils of Mr. Potter, he unintentionally, maybe intentionally, but unintentionally, I think undermines this town that has both prevented him from leaving, but also given him sustenance. Yeah. And this is particularly in the form in which his desire to build, buildings a mile tall and bridges a mile wide. How did those ambitions get channeled in this much smaller setting of Bedford Falls? Well, it's the building of Bailey Park. It's the development that he funds with the mortgage company that he's inherited from his father. He's the first builder in this area of the first suburbs. And these suburbs we're to understand, outside the city. It's where there used to be woods, right? We're told a little bit later in the movie when Mr. Potter and his henchmen are meeting, right? It's where the henchmen used to hunt squirrels, is where these little houses are. It's by the cemetery. And so we have a kind of mental image of where this is. And so it's a modern suburb. You take down some farmland, you take down some fields or a forest, and you put up the modern suburb. Now this allows people like Mr. Martini, the Italian immigrant, to escape from the clutches. And that's a good thing, to escape from the clutches of Mr. Potter. But it now puts them into a kind of anti-community. Like if Bedford Falls is the community that ultimately, by the end of the movie, shows a form of cohesion that lead its citizens to help George Bailey when he has been accused of what? Of embezzling their money. Of embezzling money that, accidentally, of course, Uncle Billy has given to Mr. Potter effectively.
Yep. Oh, that's the worst. Yeah.
Which of course he gets his comeuppance in the great Saturday Night Live sequel to that.
I've never seen. You got to see that. No.
They find out there's the
lost
lost footage where they beat up Mr. Potter.
That is the fun. I did see that. That is hilarious.
It's really funny. It's very satisfying.
Yeah. Like everybody comes together basically.
That's right. It's like a mob with pitchforks and torches.
That's funny.
Let's get them. So, but the antidote to Mr. Potter, it turns out, again, is ambivalent, because the creation of the suburbs, of course, now is creating a kind of a landscape of disassociation, of isolation, of solitariness. There are no sidewalks, there are no front porches. It doesn't have that communal aspect of Bedford Falls, and it is like the modern subdivision.
You mentioned in the book how there's multiple scenes in the movie that take place on the front porch.
Front porch is very important in Bedford Falls scenes, and it's non-existent in Bailey Park. And then you get the kind of ultimate, again, I don't know, this is, viewers may want to turn this off if you don't want to ruin your experience.
No, they should listen, because it'll just make you think. I mean, because this movie is like a center of my family. It's like so many people, and I'll watch it for Christmas for the rest of my life. But I think the points that you make in the book are extremely important to how we think about how we're living today.
Yeah. So there's a very critical scene in which George, this is after he's wished that he never existed. The angel Clarence has come down, is showing him what life would have been like if George had never been born. And they're going through various settings in Bedford Falls, which has now basically just become Pottersville as a whole. So it's really quite awful. And then he says, I need to go to Martini, because all this started when I was in Martini's bar. So let's go find Martini. And so they go to Martini's house, or I should say they go to where Martini's house should be. Now, earlier in the movie, we see the move of Martini from Pottersville to Bailey Park. They move him and his chickens and 15 kids, very Italian family.
Bread and wine or whatever.
Yeah, bread and wine. And they're in the suburbs.
Yeah.
So we know where his house is. We know the setting of it. And when they get there, they get to where the house should be. Clarence and George are looking at the cemetery. And
Clarence is doesn't want to go there, right?
He doesn't want George to see what's in the cemetery.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Which is,
his brother, right. Whose life was lost because George wasn't there to save him. So they're looking at the cemetery, and Clarence says, "Is this where the house should be?" And George says, "Yes, it should be right here." And they're looking at the cemetery. And in the actual script of the movie, it says that they are looking at the cemetery. And so, once you see this, it's profoundly discomforting and disturbing that evidently the suburbs have been built on top of the cemetery.
You got rid of the cemetery
the
to build
stones have been
modernity.
taken out.
Right.
Who knows? I often say it's the prequel to Amityville Horror, if you know that movie. Amityville Horror is a movie about a haunted house, poltergeist.
Okay.
In which the home was built
on a cemetery.
Oh, yeah.
But you do think about. I mean, I don't know if that's how many suburbs have been built on cemeteries, but the idea behind it, I mean, it's devastating.
No, I think we can read this. I think metaphorically, it's a very powerful, in some ways, a kind of representation of what the suburbs represent, a kind of delinking of people from a sense of the past. These are places without a past. You often, in the same way that, let's just take the cemetery out of the equation for the moment. In the same way you sort of just destroy a landscape, you uproot all the trees, or you eliminate the farm field, you just sever something. And the ways that the homes are built is very antiseptic. People sort of drive into their garages, and there's no sense of strong community in these places.
There's the in-between places of human interaction are gone. Even that we were just talking before we came to your house. We just took a walk around the neighborhood, and there's these back alleys and things like that. My parents' neighborhood has those back alleys as well. Or just like you park next to your house, you don't park in a garage, and all of those are kind of designed to.
So I live on a very interesting street here in South Bend. So if you go back down the street, our side of the street is the older side of the street. So we're in a house that was built in 1929. And my own house is an exception, sadly, but almost every house that you'll see in this part of the neighborhood built before the 1940s has a front porch.
They're beautiful. They're
beautiful
huge.
houses.
Yeah,
they're great.
Yeah, they're
beautiful
nice.
houses.
Yeah.
And then when you'll hit in about 2 blocks going toward campus, you'll hit a section of our street in which the building had stopped, I think, after the Great Depression. And then it restarted after World War II. And what you'll see is basically right now we're in Bedford Falls. And after you get to that point, you will see then Bailey Park, even though we're not a suburb. But the homes are Bailey Park-esque. They are houses that you drive into the driveway. So we have a back alley with a garage, no front porches. And so you literally see this kind of shift that takes place in that kind of period of time. So let me just, I hope not to destroy people's sense of It's a Wonderful Life. I think Capra, who wrote the script, what he really wanted to do was to get them into the cemetery. He wanted to get Clarence and George to the cemetery, and he had set up earlier in the script, okay, the cemetery is going to be where Martini's house is. I don't think he actually thought about it in a way. Yeah. I don't think he intended okay, we conclude therefore that Bailey Park is built on top of a cemetery. It's kind of profoundly symbolic and representative of
a subconscious
something.
Thing. Yeah.
But what he really wanted to do was to get George into the cemetery so he could discover the grave of his brother and recognize that, okay, because I was never born, I wasn't able to save my brother's life. So I don't think it was intentional in that sense, but it's very symbolic in a way. Even the lack of recognition is itself revealing in that sense. And the fact that we watch it and so few of us see it in our repeated watchings of this film is itself also representative.
That was what was fascinating about reading what you wrote on it, because George Bailey is sort of the modern man. There's this conflict at the core. And my neighborhood has no front porches, and it was built in the 70s. And that shift happened sort of like you're saying, nobody really noticed it, but it happened, and it had a major impact on how people viewed their neighbors and understood their communities. And people just move a lot more now. My great grandparents bought a house and they just lived there for 80 years or whatever. And so, that whole dynamic, I think, though, what he did building Bailey Park on top of the cemetery, not good. It does describe what has happened post-war and what the modern world is that we live in, I guess. And maybe we can conclude with this, or we can conclude however you would like, but just how, I don't know, is there a way to reverse that, or what's going forward? Obviously the American spirit is similar. I think you make that point clearly in your book, that the Odysseus spirit and the American spirit is the same. There's a lot of similarities there, but I do feel like we're losing that spirit in America.
Well, let me put it this way. I paired, the reason I wrote the book that I did was just the kind of coincidence, serendipitous coincidence in some ways, of the 250th anniversary of the Declaration and the Odyssey, the film The Odyssey, coming out in July of 2026. And it seemed like this really wonderful opportunity to reflect on these Odyssean themes as they are manifest in America, some iconic American works. But in the final chapter, I try to bring us back to kind of, after having explored these themes and these works of literature, I try to bring it back to this question that I think does arise from, who are we as a people? What's the meaning of the Declaration? What's the meaning of the American founding? Who are we as a people? And what I find valuable about this, focusing on this Odyssean element of the American spirit or the American soul, is that it is it's an internal tension. It's neither one nor the other. Mary Bailey and George Bailey have their proclivities, but those features are inside of each one of us. Yeah. We can't say it's one or the other. It's both. We're both of those. It is a constitutive part of who each of us is. And to deny one of those in favor of the other would be to, in some ways, not to be fully who we are. And in some ways, you could say it wouldn't be not just American. It would also be not fully human to deny one of those. But, and here I resort to the image of the Scylla and Charybdis, as one must, that the Scylla and Charybdis, again, I think the film, thankfully, does portray this correctly. The Scylla and Charybdis is not a choice that's between two similar or same things. It's a choice, in this case, between the lesser of two evils. I think I would describe the Scylla and Charybdis of the division of our souls as that between two goods and detriments. In other words, you can see the benefits and the detriments of each of these aspects of our soul: the explorer, the Bailey, George Bailey-esque, seeking the world,
entrepreneur,
and the Mary Bailey-esque, seeking to make, put down roots, to settle, to make a family, to make a home. The Scylla and Charybdis example is always demanding of us, and Aristotle writes about this, is always demanding of us to recognize at any given point in navigating our particular journey, both as individuals and as a nation, as a society, we have to figure out where the greater danger is.
Yeah. That's the whirlpool and
the monster that grabs six people.
That was your portrayal of that was extremely helpful. That was really.
But that's straight out of Aristotle.
Yeah,
Aristotle, who famously describes virtue as the mean between extremes, he actually invokes the example of the Scylla and Charybdis, and he says it's not always going to be down the middle. Yeah, figuring out how to be courageous is going to require for us and sort of to read the signs of the times, to know the context in which we're operating in, to see where the greater danger may lie. And it's going to change. It's not always going to be in one or the other. And it might have been in early parts of our history, we were much more homebodies. We were much less exploratory. We needed the exemplars of the George Baileys to get us up and going. I think there could be an argument made that might be the case. But given, everything you've said here today, I think it is the case. We could argue and debate, and this is part of what politics is and part of what being a human being is. We can debate where the greater danger lies, but I think we're more homeless today than we are at home. And so the Charybdis for us right now, the whirlpool for us, is too great a kind of homelessness, is too much of the figure that's adrift and is journeying perhaps without the destination of home being in view. And so there's a need to tack. Yeah. There's a need for us to move, not to deny that aspect of who we are, but what would it take, both as individuals and as a society, what would it take for us to shift our own ship, if I can use the image of ship of state and navigation, to shift us so that we're tacking and correcting for a course that may lead to a kind of catastrophe. And at the conclusion of the book, I want in some ways to say that we should keep in mind, wonderfully juxtaposed to several months and certainly weeks in which almost all the discussion of the Declaration of Independence was about freedom and liberty. And almost all of it was rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that's certainly true. Yeah. Americans are all about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But we're also about dedication and commitment and loyalty and duty and family and home. Right? Why did we want to have independence? So we could rule ourselves. And
Puritans wanted to build a home. They were pre-America, but that was their goal. They didn't have a home. They're exiles.
So the people who come here not just for freedom. They came here because they wanted to make a home. And I think that part of our story needs to be emphasized. And so I think it's wonderful that the same month we get the celebration of the Declaration, we get this opportunity to talk about the Odyssey. And I wanted to make sure we keep in mind the way that it's our story too. It's the story of who we are. We should think of ourselves as homecomers, as people who seek our homes and make homes. That's not to deny the Odyssean part of our soul that also wants to explore and to, strange new worlds and so forth. But I think it's a necessary corrective, and it's a wonderful, happy coincidence that it happened in the same month.
Yeah, it is. Well, Patrick Deneen, thank you for doing this interview. This is, amazing book. People should buy it. I loved reading it. I really did.
I loved writing it.
Yeah.
I had a great deal of fun. So thank you very much. I'm glad it hit in the way that I'd hoped it did. And I'm glad you found it to be readable and accessible. This is not meant for other academics per se, although academics are welcome.
They definitely should too, probably. But thanks so much for doing this. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thank you.